I would, if atheism were true, I wouldn't expect the problem of evil. Now, why? Because there's certain evil itself is the occurrence of evil. It
Mhm.
entails a lot of things. What does it
Mhm.
entail, right? For us to make the judgment that there's evil
Mhm.
entails that there are conscious beings that are capable of moral knowledge, that
Mhm.
live in a contingent universe. And I don't think atheism can clear any of those hurdles in principle,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So if you can't clear the hurdles on the way to the judgment of evil, then
Mhm.
you cannot possibly then like these evidential considerations just are are pointless, right?
Mm.
It
Mm.
like I mean, yeah, think of it this way, right? I mean, like imagine somebody like there's an obstacle course race, right? And the final
Yeah.
obstacle was like lifting a boulder and putting it up on a pedestal, and the guy who's gonna sort of and say there's a competitor there, and he's like really burly in the upper body, so you think he might be able to lift this boulder and put it on a pedestal, right? But in order to get to that, he's got to clear a bunch of other obstacles that involve running and jumping and swimming and all this other stuff, and then you find out he's got no legs, right? and like whatever else you want to do, but like that would make it impossible for him to clear those obstacles. Well, then however good he would be at lifting the boulder is irrelevant
Mhm.
because he's never going to get there.
Mhm.
And that's how I think about atheism, right? It's like if you think that atheism can get to a certain point, right, which is when everything else is online of rational beings and consciousness and a contingent universe, then yeah, atheism run by a principle of indifference, excuse me, because that's sort of what the atheistic hypothesis is run by, a principle of indifference, right? Then you might think at that point it has some explanatory force of why there's as much suffering as there is in the world, right? But I'm saying
Mm.
it can't even get there, right? It
Mm.
doesn't even have a
Mhm. Mhm.
chance of getting there. Whereas theism clearly does. And then it's this question of, well, should we expect suffering and evil on theism,
Mm.
or does theism overpredict? And I don't think theism overpredicts at all. I think theism actually entails a world pretty much like ours. And I'll just give a sketch, and then you can
Mhm.
poke at it if you want.
Mhm.
So, from a classical theistic perspective, remember that God is perfectly good. He's a subsistent good, but only God is metaphysically impeccable, right?
Mhm.
Everything else God creates is metaphysically fallible. It's a composite of potency and act. It not only it not only is not its own sort of moral standard because it's not the good itself. It's a participated good. It's a participated existence. It only it could fail. In other words, well, that's true for us as human beings, right? We're not sort of the moral rule, like God is the moral rule as the self-subsistent good. We participate in being just as we participate in humanity, but we always have to sort of like look beyond ourselves for the moral rule. And so our liberty is very different from God. It's a mistake to think that freedom entails the ability to sin. Clearly
Mm.
not, right? Because God
Mhm.
can't sin.
Mhm.
This is a mistake people make with a free will defense. That's not right. However, what there is a sort of free will defense to be found in philosophical anthropology, where we realize that yes, we're creatures of liberty, but we're creatures of a metaphysical fallible liberty, right? And that is a metaphysical necessity because only God is metaphysically infallible, right? So if God's going to aim for love, which I think is perfectly expected if God exists, of friendships, love, and communion with creatures like us, it just is a sort of metaphysical necessity that has to bring in independent free wills, which are, since they are not God, that possible failures, right? They just could fail. They could make a moral miscalculation given their nature, right?
Mhm.
Well, then it also just seems very probable that at some point they will make a moral miscalculation, right? It seems
Mhm.
like there would be something like a fall. Okay. Well, now I'm kind of arguing that classical theism, I think, actually predicts Christianity or something very close to it.
Mm.
Now, might God have sort of good reasons for allowing a world like ours with as much suffering and evil? Certainly, because we think that suffering and so a lot of moral evil can just be explained by our moral miscalculations. But suffering can also be extremely medicinal. It can provide opportunities for redemption, for reductions in egoism, superficiality, false notions of just robust independence, which aren't true. It can bring us to repentance. It can cause our will to acquiesce so we can accept God's further grace, right? So no,
Mhm.
actually, a world of suffering and evil, what I'm saying, especially this world, right? This world that when we think about it, yes, there's a lot of suffering and evil, but it seems to be like a finely tuned amount of suffering and evil, if that makes sense, right?
Mhm.
It's neither too much nor too little, because we can easily imagine worlds, especially an atheistic world, where like everybody despairs and commits suicide. That's not the world we live in, right? We could also imagine a world where there's just like one mosquito bite. That would seem too little. You see what I mean? So I'm actually suggesting that the amount of suffering and evil we have in the world, which is a lot, don't get me wrong, I'm not downplaying, it's a lot, but given everything else we've just said, it seems like it falls like just within that sort of narrow range of all the ways our world could have had more or less suffering and evil that we would expect if God exists and is trying to draw us back to himself, if that makes sense. Plus, I think theism entails an afterlife. So if this life isn't the end of the story, then the atheist, I would argue, is always going to be question begging if they claim that some evils are unjustified, right? That there are some gratuitous evils. How are you ever going to prove that, right? You can't. If theism entails an afterlife and if God is perfectly good, then the theist has good reason to think that none of the evils, even if they haven't seemed to have been conquered or defeated in this life, are never conquered or defeated. And that just all seems right to me. So I would say the more I've thought about it, the more it just has seemed absolutely correct to me that no, theism is not over predictive. If I think you do the metaphysics, this is exactly the type of world we expect with a perfectly good God, the God of classical theism, and not at all the world we would expect if naturalism is true. So in that sense, I want to say initially evil might seem like a problem for God. Substantially, evil points toward the existence of God.
Oh wait, before you go, I would really appreciate it if you would consider supporting this channel. This is my primary means to provide for my family, and it also helps me to produce content like this video. If you would like to support me, become a patron by visiting patreon.com/Reason and Theology. You'll also get access to extra exclusive content when you become a patron. Lastly, hit that like button and the subscribe button, and be sure to leave a comment down below. God bless.